Hello and welcome to the Futurist Letters Show. My name is Cairo Smith. It's evening here, but I am joined by my co-host Kenny White. Hey Kenny.
Hey, what's up, Cairo?
Feeling good. Feeling good. Just got through this very interesting century spanning or sort of beyond time relativistically sci-fi novel Accelerando by Charles Stross, which was Kenny's recommendation. And we are here now, just the two of us, with no guest, to discuss the book. So I guess the first thing I want to ask. Oh, and by the way, we've decided to discontinue our self-serve sponsorship portal. It was just a little cumbersome, and we like doing things manually better. So you can just email us if you want to sponsor the show. But Kenny, I guess I'll ask, and if you could go on for a little bit, how did this book, Accelerando by Charles Stross, get on your radar? It's about a 20-year-old book, and why did you decide initially to read it?
Well, there's this friend of mine who occupies the a weird. If you imagine like the internet as this large, complex fractal with a certain amount of self similarity, but also certain patches of this fractal that are completely unlike sort of your regular day to day experience. Let's just say completely beyond like your algorithmic feed. And there's a friend of mine who I think occupies a space of the internet um, and just information flows that's completely outside of like my typical algorithmic feed. And he was talking about this book in a way that didn't make any sense. He couldn't explain it to me. And I don't know, I kind of forgot about it. But then I was like looking for a few years later, I was looking for a book to read, and I popped into my mind again randomly. And I was like, screw it, let's just buy it, see what it's about. And then I read it, and then I realized why he couldn't explain it to me or describe it to me adequately, because it's kind of a hard book to describe. And then when we started hanging out, I was thought to myself, actually, I think I read it while we were hanging out, while I knew you, and I was like, this would be a great book for Kyra to read because he seems like one of the few people who could help me make sense of what I just read. And yeah, that's how it came about.
Well, I hope we can slightly attempt to do that today, although I think it would take me at least a couple more readings and probably a deep dive into some of the subjects that Strauss has studied. Um, the book does concern economics, which I know is a field with which you have some familiarity, Kenny, but it also touches on so much more. There's also a whole lot of personal flavor in the book. There's a lot of very British flavor, and there's a lot of uniquely British anxiety. He's got this whole part in the first third. I guess we should back up and we should talk about the structure of the book, right? So the book
Yeah.
starts in, I believe, the 2020s. It starts about right where we are now. Having been written in I guess, the early 2000s and published ultimately in 2005. Published, I believe, first in Asimov magazine as short stories and novellas, which you'd think, I guess if you know that going in, you might be sort of prejudiced because you're going, okay, this is a collection of short stories and novellas. You're not going to, see this sort of single stroke of cohesion. But the amount of topics that the book is trying to cover is so vast that it actually might have been good for it to germinate from several seeds like this. And it's broken into three parts. Do you want to basically talk about what those three parts are?
Yeah, so the first part follows a man named Manfred. Um, and it's honestly, I think you described it to me, Cairo, as it's almost like speed running Neuromancer or something along those lines. It feels, the first part feels very much like your typical like cyberpunk type of novel or short story where you have the main guy Manfred, who's like this serial entrepreneur hacker, and he's off, doing cyberpunk kind of things. Meanwhile, in the background, like things keep accelerating and going faster and faster, and at the beginning of the first part, Manfred is pretty much at the bleeding edge of technology, leveraging what today we would call like AI agents, which I think are called agents in the book. But by the end of it, people are starting to get brain implants, and he's feeling like he's falling behind. And the next phase, I think, follows his daughter. I'm blanking on her name.
Amber.
Amber, and she's out in the outer reaches of the solar system, does a little bit of interstellar travel, communes with alien super intelligences, and comes back. Spoiler alert. And meanwhile, the solar system is getting disassembled into a Dyson sphere of nano supercomputers. And then the third book is kind of the aftermath of humans trying to, or I should say, entities of a human level of intelligence that we as a reader can relate to, trying to survive and coexist in a world dominated by incomprehensible super intelligences, both in our solar system and in other solar systems.
Some of which are alien, and some of which are, I guess you could philosophically draw a continuity from human beings. They're referred to as post-humans. They're referred to as the vile offspring by the sort of Amish-esque holdouts who don't do this like brain uploading. Just to give you a scale, this is like the thing that hooked me on this book when Kenny and I talked about it a month ago is it was basically like the whole point of the singularity is that you can't imagine what's going to happen next, because at a certain point of line going up, like it looks like infinity. And he actually took on this impossible task and tried to very seriously guess or offer a possibility for what after the singularity looks like. And in his world, it happens extremely quickly. It happens basically within a century. About halfway through the book in the 2050s, I think everyone gets rid of their physical bodies. Meaning not our protagonists, but actually like the majority of the human race. And I think like Stross understands that this would be such an unfathomable experience to like upload into these like, it's not just that they're without bodies, they become like hive minds. And so we sort of stay with people who are not making that leap. Either because they're Luddites or because they're way out like in the Jupiter belt doing their own thing and like not part of this whole Earth hive mind. But he like recognizes the unfathomability of becoming a super intelligence, which is why we stay with like the left behinds after that moment of singularity, which I thought was an interesting choice.
I mean, I think it's kind of the only way you can do it. And I think he makes this illusion in the book where these super intelligences are a bit like trying to relate to these super intelligences is a bit like trying to relate to God in a way. I mean, he's not necessarily saying that they are God, but saying that like relating to them is similarly difficult. And like you look at all the holy texts, it's rarely like written from God's perspective and more like anthropomorphized and told from our perspective. Not in every case, but I feel like it's just the only way you're going to be able to talk about the singularity is from the standpoint of a bystander or spectator or participant who's got roughly our level of computation and intelligence.
Yeah, it's interesting. Um, it's interesting. I guess. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say this. There's a certain almost like anti that a sci-fi novel like this does when it talks about what happens 10, 20, 30 years in the future. Whereas the book ages like a wine, you actually start to see whether the table stakes pay off. Whether the author, like this guy's in '05 writing about 2025. Here we are in 2025 evaluating what he got right. And in that way, he's sort of like building pedigree, right? He's building like a proof of Nostradamus, like clairvoyance, which gives him like gives us the confidence in him to like take what he says seriously for the rest of the book. And that's part of why this book is so crazy, is because to me, like, he starts in a 2025 that is really damn close in a lot of ways to where you open it and you're like, oh yeah, yeah, he got that, we're about there. And then it just goes like hyperbolic, like, so that makes you pay attention. What is your take on that?
I mean, I remember when I was reading it, that was right about like the whole ChatGPT like mania, when ChatGPT was first coming out and people were like using it and discovering all the different use cases for these LLM chatbots. And he references these types of AI type agents quite a bit in the beginning of the book. He references things like smart contracts, which is what I'm familiar with. That's what I work on personally. And it will basically, what I mean by that is like self-executing corporations, and the synthesis of like capitalism and corporate law with like computation and the internet. Uh, yeah, there's all sorts of themes, and just and things. He doesn't just like name check them, but they're like a big part of like the plot of the book, especially in the early days. And it was kind of freaky just how similar, how relatable it was to like our current life. Obviously, it's dramatized, and it's not exactly right, but yeah, I was very impressed.
One thing that I thought, I'm sure this stood out to you. It's funny because I knew you had read this before, Kenny, and I know you so well. I was almost reading it as you in a way, like I sort of had like a very rudimentary, like simulated Kenny going. So like I'd get to a part where they were talking about like macroeconomics or like, it's funny. He so obviously grasped where everything was going with crypto and with the idea of like money on the internet, like on chain, decentralized. He just didn't have the words exactly. Like crypto is in this book in everything but name. Um, and he sort of abstracts it as like, I think he calls it like shares controlled by agents. Like he's got all the pieces except the actual cryptography. But I was reading it and I was going, oh, okay, I see why Kenny would like, a lot of the DeFi evangelism that happens in the space, it's like that's already the status quo to some degree in the beginning of this book, Accelerando, with the full understanding that like the US federal government, et cetera, will like push back. And that's one thing I thought was cool is like he addresses things like basically like a debt crisis and an aging population and things that you normally hear from like, Ron Paul people in like a way that is very like clear-sighted about the risks and doesn't think they can just be hand waved away, but is also not just like a jumping off point for like a libertarian uh I mean, I guess he's even like taking some dunks on objectivists at a couple points, but yeah. Um Interesting stuff. He sort of sees the nation states as like atrophying and the like on-chain states as like being ascendant.
Which, I mean, looking around the modern world, the on-chain states have not ascended, but the nation states aren't looking so good. Um,
One thing that I thought, and all we can do when we read someone's vision of the future really is compare it to our own and either update ours based on theirs or quibble with theirs based on ours. And having the huge advantage of getting to see the actual 2020s, one thing that struck me was maybe this, I don't want to ascribe this to just his background as a programmer or what, but the use of force has a shockingly low amount of relevance in this novel for everything that happens with this transition to like posthumanism, even when like there's sort of the performance of force, like SWAT teams showing up with like weird looking like cannon guns, they don't do anything. They don't ever try to like physically arrest anybody. Like no, aside from like in the simulation where the lobsters kill like the divorce lawyer, like nobody is ever like actually physically threatened. And it just felt a bit, I don't know if naive is the word, but like it was weird how deferent everyone in the book was to like the primacy of law and ideas. Even like there's like a one paragraph mention where like India and Pakistan go to nuclear war, and what it says is like, oh yeah, the first world basically just like intercepted all the missiles in the air and also like disabled all the cyber war malware, and so then like nothing happened. Which I don't know. I don't know if that checks out for me.
I guess it would be a nicer future if that's how it plays out. I think on the one hand, like, unlikely that force is going to play such a small role. Um, at least in certain theaters, both geographically and ideologically, I think there's probably a high propensity for violence in the future. But on the other hand, I think what he's going to get right is that, like, if you're a historian looking back at the 21st century, and there really, and assuming there really will be some kind of singularity phase transition from industrial society, which is what we were at the end of the millennium, to whatever the heck we end up looking like in the post 21st century. If that transition really happens, like, I don't think historians are going to look back at all the different wars and political violence as super explanatory of the world we live in.
I will say, just thinking on it a little more, within his framework, it seems like this is alluded to it a few times. I forget the exact word he uses, but basically he talks about this multinational agreement of law that almost sounds like it's like law on chain, like it's coded in Python or something they mentioned a few times. Um, where like nation states are still the highest level of like sovereign. There's no like extremely strong UN, but they've like all signed up for this basically like super version of red notices or like what's it called, the International Police, Interpol, that kind of thing, where like they respect each other's internal law, which is why Amber, like, a lot of this book is sort of like a legal custody and divorce drama, which I know is maybe supposed to be funny, but it again, it's a little incongruous, I think probably on purpose with the stakes of what's happening. But Amber, like, she goes all the way to Jupiter and she's still fighting bizarre custody battles over her emancipation and like her dad and mom. And she's like trying to legally change her citizenship to like the like Oregon Christian Confederation or like these like weird startup states where she can like have the legal means to do what she wants to do. And I guess like if there is enough consensus on enforcing national laws across states that like that goes all the way out to Jupiter and you're going to be boned if you become a fugitive, then maybe that makes sense why there's very little use of force, because we've built this like very Loctite consensus. Um, it makes me wonder like what the like penal system of this world looks like in like the 20s, 30s, and 40s.
It's like the book is a weird contrast between you can just do things, agency of the main characters,
Yeah,
with a weird like fixation on legalism and following like the minutia of like arcane,
yeah.
also archaic laws that I don't know if there's a way to square that circle. That might just be um, Well, I mean, the best way is to have Stross on here as a podcast guest and ask
That would
him.
be very cool.
But I don't know if I can really I don't know if I can make the two things make sense. They do seem like they're in contradiction to each other.
Well, you know, Strauss is English, and obviously England has had some of the like strongest continuity of legal system of any nation in the world. Um, he also repeatedly compares the solar system, as many do, like The Expanse does this, to the Wild West. Um, but maybe it's harder to imagine the psychology of the Wild West and really what wild means in full, um, being farther from it physically and culturally. I don't know. Or maybe he meant the analogy only in other ways. But yeah, gosh, I want to focus on the first part more because I feel like comparing the 20s of the book to our 20s is like one of the most interesting things we can do at this moment. Like we'll look back on it in 10 years and be like, huh, here's what they got right and wrong.
Well, what else struck you about the first part of the book?
Well, what struck me is that AI and robotics are in about exactly the correct place. Um, so he really hit the dart right in the center of the bullseye on guessing where 20 years of robotics and AI would take us. He understood that like computers would get cheap with microprocessing. There's this like recurring device he uses where he's comparing the like total silicon thinking power of all the chips produced on Earth to the total human thinking power of all the babies born in like a second. And there's a moment where like the thinking power of the chips like surpasses the thinking power of all the humans being born. And there's this like it feels like that's when the singularity is like locked in. You know, like we can't pull out the the power plug now. It's running on its own power. And that just made it real, you know? Like, because we probably will live to see that in some capacity. This sum of chip output surpassing human births.
I mean, my understanding is that the current AI data centers, not necessarily the really big ones, but just like the standard ones, are roughly equivalent to human brains processing power. I could be off, and maybe that might be a couple years old. But let's just say that like one data center
Sure.
in 2025 is like one human brain's worth of processing capacity. It's also how do you measure it? You know, it's not really clear what metric you could even use. But if that's the case, I look back at like 1950s when a computer took up the size of a warehouse or a room, and that computer is, you know, any orders of magnitude like less powerful than my phone. And going from there, like you could probably back out like at what point does one of these warehouses have these like industrial AI data centers? At what point do they have more processing power than 7-8 billion human brains?
Yeah, and what happens when someone with a lot of money, you know, kind of like a Large Hadron Collider type thing, decides to spend the money to run a neuron for neuron map of a brain across data centers just to see what happens? And what happens if it starts kind of thinking, you know? I mean, these are questions the book tries to answer a little. It's funny, it's almost a send up of this obsession with like reforming economics and law and personhood. Like briefly, like Manfred in the first half of the first section is very concerned with like personhood for uploaded people, like legal personhood. And what happens is not that he necessarily succeeds or fails, but that if you really are accelerandoing like to vertical, like laws stop mattering before you can even get that like through the Senate, you know? Like it all just becomes so transitive. which I thought was a very cool way to end that segment. Um,
One of my favorite parts of the early book that continues on a little bit into the next chapter or next part is like the Franklin Borg, where there's some eccentric billionaire, I believe, who like pays for that data center to like try and upload his brain. He doesn't get it all the way there. He gets like a decent chunk of it, and then they upload other people's brains and use that to like patch in the holes, kind of like Jurassic Park, where they use like frog DNA to patch in the holes with the dinosaur DNA. And
yeah,
but in return, like then they have this whole giant collective where they are obliged to run part of their brain synapses or hardware. It's not entirely clear via implants. They're required to run this like Franklin super organism. Franklin's the name of the billionaire. This billionaire super organism brain, and they all kind of mesh together. And it's not clear exactly what happens to that Borg organism. We miss the transition later in the book, but presumably become like a superstructure for a whole bunch of other things.
yeah. That's one thing that is interesting about the last third of the book is that we're following the left behinds, and in the last few pages they talk about stop now and go read the book if you don't want to know how it ends. In the last few pages, they say that human beings, presumably somewhat natural human beings, and there is like a natural non-GMO humans movement in the book, are spread across like 100 light years of space, living in various habitats, with their little 60s fridges or whatever they have in their little pods. And the matryoshka brains, like the god intelligences, the post-humans, don't seem to be actively trying to exterminate these humans, which you'd think they would be able to muster the resources to do. So it actually sort of leaves the Fermi paradox a bit open, because they answer it toward the end of the second book. They go, oh, Fermi paradox is solved because when a species reaches a certain level of development, they upload themselves into a big computer brain, and then it's hard to travel because they have so much data that they can't really go from place to place. But as we see with humanity, something like 2+ billion people just don't mind upload. So you would think that if that happened with other civilizations, the Fermi problem is still open, because there would still be species moving around like in meat space, doing like regular human things. Unless something does go and sweep them all up and kill them.
That's a good point. I didn't even like put that together. I mean, maybe the humans are just built different. Um,
There's also a huge argument that, and you were the one saying before the show that I think we are built different, but that the ending is ambiguous. I think at any point after like the early 2030s in this book, you could say it's all within a simulation that is put on sort of as a show of Plato's cave for any one of the characters. Like, once you can go into a simulation that you don't know isn't real, and you're plugging in and out, you've basically like lost your grounding for reality, because all any superintelligence would have to do is play for you a scene where you unplug and go back to real life, but you're of course still within, just playing a scene where you're out, and then you're out of sync, and you think you're out but you're in, and then you can never know again if you're out or in, which is a little scary.
I mean, at that point, and I don't know if the book really goes into this idea too much, but if there's no way to tell the difference between a simulation and reality, then in some ways there isn't a difference. It's just how if there's no way of knowing, like there's no test you could do to test whether you're in a simulation or not, then I would almost argue like objectively or empirically or scientifically. I'm not sure which adverb I'm trying to grasp at here, but if there's no like theoretically, there's no test you could do to verify whether you're in real life or in a simulation, then I would argue that there's no difference.
Isn't a non-lucid dream sort of already a preview of what that experience might be like? I mean, nightly we experience things that in the moment we're convinced are real. We just have a process built into us to terminate the simulation, flush it, and rouse us. Um, at which point we go, oh, none of that was real. And we sort of retroactively, but the thing is, like, you say, like, ability to tell. A human being has different abilities to tell from moment to moment based on, like, their level of cognition, their wakingness, their drunkenness, their sleepiness. Like, in your sleep, you can't tell that it's not real, but then you can reach a peak. I don't know. That's sort of like what they touch on in The Matrix, where at the very highest peaks of his perception, Neo can catch little glimpses that show to him it's not real, and then he goes back down into it. Do you think these are dangerous ideas to entertain in a world where simulations are not real and schizophrenic delusions are? I mean, do you think even putting these ideas out in space can, like, screw people mentally?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of direct experience or indirect experience with the schizophrenic mindset. So I don't know. I feel like I'm hard to say if it's dangerous, but
Yeah.
I think it's an idea you can't contain. Anyone who's played a computer game or anyone who's uh, done any kind of role playing, I mean, whether it's on a in real life or on a computer, like I think it's just. I mean, I think even before this idea of a simulation, like what is the whole idea of like heaven? Like you
Yeah.
die and you go to heaven or the
I mean,
afterlife.
like Gnosticism, like the idea that we're, like, in the demiurge now. Like, that's
Yeah.
basically just simulation theory before the idea of a computer. Yeah. In fact, you could even say Christianity itself describing, like, this world as a test, and then, like, an immortal soul that's going to, like, log out upon death and reveal its true luminous form in the grace of God. I mean, that sounds a lot like saying that this is a game and we're going to log out, you know, and that we have a real self somewhere else that's not tethered to death. Um,
I mean, yeah.
so
Even
simulation theory, I think, is probably hardly alone in spreading these ideas.
I think even like Taoist philosophy is like, is there a borderline between your wakeful self and your dreaming self? And is that border between being awake and dreaming, is that analogous to the border of being dead versus alive?
This this discussion here actually makes me realize something else about the book that struck me. And I don't want to call it a shortcoming, but it is I found an odd choice. Not a single character in the entire book has a moment of existential crisis or doubt, or really even ennui. Like, the characters who are sort of like Western liberals, even as they, like, upload their bodies and, like, discard their forms and become super intelligences or, like, get augmented, they're, like, so driven by their, like, human urges. Like, basically, like, 4x plus sex. Like, explore, exterminate, like, assert yourself, get, like, they're never like, oh my god, I could copy myself, you know? Who's even real? Like, they do copy themselves and they just go in stride. And similarly, like, the people who are devoutly religious, like the Mormons or the Muslims, they just keep chugging along, like, with their religions in the face of all the accelerandoing. How did you feel about that?
It's a good point. There's no like Nietzsche equivalent in the 21st century for this book, where like
No. I mean, there probably are characters having these crises, we just don't see them. This family, I guess the Massix family, that we follow, they're all like very it's a bunch of soft men and imperious women, for the most part. This seems to recur throughout the generations.
Indeed, indeed. I maybe to Steelman the characters a little bit. I think because the first main character Manfred was on the bleeding edge of this technological transition. He does have a bit of a existential crisis at the end of the first book where he feels like he's getting left behind by the future. But it's less about like, am I even me, but more like, am I even relevant? And
Yeah,
then is the next main character, Amber, his daughter. She's like born into this crazy world where all
yeah.
these things just seem normal to her.
She's like
It's
tech
kind of like,
native. Yeah.
yeah, it almost kind of reminded me of like, you know, my the way my parents use computers versus the way we use computers, where it's like all these things are seem impossibly complicated to people who were born before this era of computation, and it feels entirely natural and intuitive to me. And I feel like the Amber character was kind of like that with all these crazy new technologies coming online, where it just felt like second nature to her, and she didn't bother her or disrupt her flow.
Even being all natural in her genetics, which I thought was a cool choice because at the time that Amber is born in the late 2020s, gene editing is already common to give people mild superhuman abilities. He says, like extra memory, lack of disease, and for these sort of cultish reasons, her mother doesn't do that. So we get a young protagonist who's sort of at this inflection point of the human to post-human transition, who is still human, maybe more than most of her peers, and yet she's still augmented even more than her father in all these physical ways, with her data banks, her mind uploading. Um, I think there's a high percentage of people today who think of mind uploading as a kind of death. Um, we've run stories about that anxiety in Futurist, about people, the idea of like mind uploading their parents and then like regretting it or having some sort of horrible fate. Um, I almost wonder if you could get people to overcome that, kind of like people used to be afraid to break their necks going over 30 miles an hour, like on a train. And then, you know, the next generation, they were like flying on planes and doing all this stuff. Um, if you could get people to accept what looks to us like death, and they would just conceive of themselves in this continuity beyond the physical. I guess again, we already do it with heaven. Christians
Well,
already do that.
I don't know if it might be hard to get diehard Christians on board. They may not be early adopters of
No,
this, but I I'll tell you what. Physiologically, like our our brains and consciousnesses disassemble themselves when we're in a deep sleep, and certainly when we're under general anesthesia, something weird is happening. And you know, one argument to make is when you get digitized and run in like a simulated computer, that there's a brief break of continuity, where you're not
yeah.
really your brain anymore. But on the other side of it, you're the same. You could say like when you get put under general anesthesia, there's a similar break in continuity. It just so happens the computer doesn't go anywhere. Just it's the same hardware, but the software goes through the same reboot. And to what extent does the hardware, or are you the hardware versus are you the software? Um,
I think one thing that gives us so much anxiety about this idea of uploading is that we already know we can duplicate instances of computer programs. It's trivial. And there's so much of our social fabric that is reliant on the continuity of one human that can only be one human. If we want to reproduce, we only do it vertically down generations, involving this sort of, you know, normally sexual selection and recombination. Or I guess we already have the technology today to do some sort of cloning, but most people don't seem to have an interest in that, directly cloning themselves as a baby. However, if you can upload a person, I think we all just intuitively know you could copy paste them. And if a human has a desire to replicate themselves vertically down generations, wouldn't some also have a desire to replicate themselves horizontally into other instances? And how do you deal with that? Do you make it illegal to duplicate yourself? Do you put a limit, like you can have 5, Do you have a tax? It's like an unsolvable problem to me.
Well, like there's like a novel, Altered Carbon, which I think is also a TV show on Netflix,
Uh,
where you can like upload and download your consciousness and beam it, you know, across the galaxy, and that's how humans like deal with traveling between the stars. But it feels like in that book, it feels like the whole way they get around like what happens if you copy yourself is they make it like highly illegal, and everyone just accepts that this is a taboo that should never be violated. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think as soon as you let people upload and copy themselves, like they're going to start doing it. I think it's like, I mean, I've often when I'm working on projects, be like, man, I wish I could just like copy an instance of myself and just like have like 10 of me working on this problem together instead of just one of me. And cloning isn't really the same thing, because they're genetically the same, but they're the nature might be the same, but the nurture factor is totally different.
I
So
mean,
they're
we
going
have
to
identical twins, and they have their own selves. Yeah.
yeah.
But if I were to basically duplicate you, like copy paste you right there, I mean, you would both have had the experience up until the second of being the Alpha Kenny.
I mean, at what point? Who is Alpha Kenny? Who is Beta Kenny?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are some ways that it could be clear. There are other ways that it could be ambiguous.
I think what makes it so disturbing to think about is it challenges the very notion, not just like the social fabric, but also like just the notion of identity. Like,
Yeah.
I think of, because like I experience the world from like a singular viewpoint, and that singular viewpoint is basically the same thing as me. But as soon as I'm able to copy myself and have that self experience multiple viewpoints, then like the whole notion of me like is totally you realize that the notion of like me and self, well, whatever the phenomenology of it, fine, that's what you're experiencing, but your abstract concept of it is totally wrong, and I think that's like very disturbing.
I guess I'll get to the point where I say this. We're almost 45 minutes in. I completely disagree with basically everything about the 2020s of the everything after the 2020s of this book as some reflection on what might actually happen. I think it becomes utter silliness. I mean, we open up Amber's book, beginning of the second book, and she's like a 12-year-old going to Jupiter or something like that, 15-year-old. And I think I like almost rolled my eyes a little bit in my head. But here's the thing. One, you could say, oh, this is a metaphor. All these things will happen. They just might not happen in 50 years. It might be 500, right? Like the timeline doesn't matter. It's just the progression. Two, he has built in this conceit that makes it impervious to criticism if it doesn't happen, which is that I think starting in the middle of Manfred's book, they receive this alien transmission that basically unlocks new kinds of nanocomputing for them. That gets decoded by Aneko, the cat. And so anything that you point to after the first few chapters, and you go, hey, Mr. Stross, that didn't happen. It's like, well, we didn't get the alien transmission in our universe. It's a bit of a catch-all. So in that way, it becomes like a little less hard sci-fi for me after the 2020 segment. but I still enjoyed it.
I all right. I don't fully agree.
Okay, hit
No.
me.
All right. So I think the timeline feels like it's aggressive. Like for example, in the 2030s, they have full on like neural implants, and they're commonplace. And I think putting electrodes in brains is really freaking hard, and it's going to take a long time. And I don't think that that's going to happen. Sending like neural augmented children out into the solar system, it's a bit of an extreme. It's a bit of an extreme thing to happen, but if you assume that like you really are going through like this exponentially accelerating pace, at some point the children's generation is going to be so disconnected and
Yeah.
augmented compared to the parents' generation. I can kind of like close my eyes and believe it.
Oh, the thing that made me crack up the most, I talked a lot about what he got right. At a certain point in book one, he says that the GDP growth per year of the EU is about 20%. And I just had to stop. Go, come on, man. But whatever. Sorry, keep going.
Okay, I mean, another thing speaking of things he gets wrong in the first chapter is he totally misses cloud computing. Like the main character Manfred, he basically his suit is like filled with like the equivalent of NVIDIA GPUs, like sewn into it, I think.
Yeah.
And like that's not how it works. Like no one, we just have data, warehouses full of data centers that we tap into.
And what's
Um,
interesting is he understands the idea of like share computing at the like LAN level. Like he talks about people borrowing each other's like cycles from local like appliances in the house. He just doesn't expand that all the way to like data centers. Yeah.
so what I did like about the post chapter one or post book one or whatever part of the book is that the the whole like higher level concept of disassembling like all the matter in the solar system and turning it into like I think he called it computronium, which is just some small floating piece of dust like rice grain size like supercomputer that is more powerful than any like data warehouse we've ever built, and they all just float as like a Dyson sphere around the sun using solar power to run crazy, I don't know, whatever the heck post-human intelligences do.
To just think. Yeah.
And that, to me, that felt like the, if not inevitable, felt very plausible, and it almost like a, he's kind of neutral on whether it's a good or bad thing, but
Yeah, he is.
you could tell it spooks him just the way his characters and the way he describes it. But I think that feels like the trajectory we're on, where it's just going to be about maximizing the computational density of the solar system, I think is how he describes it.
He's got the guts. I will say this is the very best thing about the books. The book. He like takes the premise and then he has the guts to do it. You know? Like Computronium. Like, okay, let's just follow Moore's law all the way there. Let's just think, what if this doesn't stop? And then like even when you arrive at something that would sound like a, you know, it basically when the idea becomes so extreme that it stops being cinematic because it's more about inconceivable ideas than about like two people in a room arguing, he doesn't like back out. You know, his way of keeping it like cinematic is that he sticks with the holdouts, but he lets the whole singularity thing rip, and that's like what you're buying a ticket for when you go in. So I was very pleased with that. My copy here. I don't know if you have the same pull quotes as mine, but I'm looking at the pull quotes on the back. The first one I've got is um, popular science. You know what? You know what I was doing? I was reading pull quotes for his previous book, and I was thinking, man, they didn't understand this at all. But it's actually me not understanding their quotes for his previous book. So, Penguin or whoever is off the hook this time. I do recommend, by the way, and I think we've got you.
It's it's also a it's a difficult book, I think, to read and discuss because even if it sounds crazy as we're describing it, you got to keep in mind that like almost every page or paragraph has like a crazy new idea that's like
Or
referenced
10.
maybe one or two times in the entire book.
Yeah.
Um, that are honestly felt worthy of like me thinking about them. It's like they didn't feel like it was just like a stream of consciousness line. It felt like he was actually like, oh man, I like there's this idea I'm really interested in. I'm gonna put this in here, but I don't have time to like make a whole book about it. So here's like one line about it.
Okay, more glazing of what he got right. He got the whole arc for China completely right. Everything. The change in the government. I mean, I guess he had Dengism to look at, but like China being the sort of robotics workshop that the rest of the world looks at in wonder. Um, he nailed. He doesn't talk a whole lot. I actually don't think he even mentions Africa once. He says that Iran is like vaguely liberalizing. He talks about a woman in like a sheer veil. Um, and he does complain about the NHS both being bureaucratic and staffed with sort of like incomprehending immigrants. But overall, there's no like, I guess two big things that show up in this sort of near future anxiety story are like, one, sort of from a right angle, you get like um, demographic anxiety, of sort of the encroachment of the third world as they see it. Or two, you get like the same thing, but from this sort of like equity and climate change lens of like, oh, we're gonna ruin the earth, and the the global south is gonna like be ruined and like decimated by emissions. And he doesn't touch any of those. I mean, literally, like I said, as I was finishing the book, Kenny, I sent you like the Donald Trump, like everything is computer. But really, like everything is computer in this book so fast that like none of that stuff even matters.
Well, I think like the Earth gets disassembled into computronium, and
Yeah, by like
there is no Earth.
maybe 60% of the way through, the
Yeah,
whole surface of the Earth is turned into computronium. I mean, this thing just goes and goes and goes. Any like one or two chapters of this could be its own book, which I guess is because it was originally short stories and novellas. Um,
I I think what I walked away from the book because I agree like the further out it goes the less believable and plausible it starts to sound, but what I walked away from the book was I felt like I had emotionally internalized the consequences of exponential growth and change because like you can read a textbook or read a blog post or read like a piece of analysis about like what exponential change means, but sometimes you have to read like fiction for the emotional part of your brain to really appreciate it. And there's I think that saying that like we overestimate like how much things can change in 2 years, but we underestimate how much things can change in 10. And I feel like this book, after reading it, I walked away being like, okay, like this is the closest I've come to like experiencing what a singularity is going to be like. Where, at the beginning of the book, the things that matter and seem really important and are really important at the beginning of the book are like almost like not even inconsequential, almost like unrelatable to the end of the book. And I feel like that's probably what a singularity is going to feel like, where the things that we're worried about today, 100 years
yeah.
from now, might seem like not even just like like incomprehensible.
And there's a certain sort of rapture quality to that you can think sort of a secular rapture. It's funny though, I think that there is going to be a lot more fighting. Maybe that's just my cynicism over all these things before we just turn the earth into computronium. I mean, I think about somewhere like r slash singularity. I don't know if you've ever been there. But the singularity, this whole idea, like once we build good AI, we can't predict the future. It's basically the same as trying to look through a black hole. That's what this book is about. It even has a black hole on the cover. But like r
Yeah.
slash singularity was probably started in like the late 2000s, early 2010s by like the college educated nerds who were on Reddit at that time to basically like track progress towards this and see what's coming. And at that time, this was like a low salience enough issue that it was basically like a hobbyist discussion. And like people like you and me could like read about like, oh, imagine if everything's computerized. Whoa. But like there were none of the stakes of like, you know, facing that as like a political issue. And then two things happened. One, Reddit became more democratized and more people from lower and less secure strata joined with their literacy, etc. And two, these things did become politically salient, you know, as much as like, and then the singularity starts feeling less like the rapture and more like the 1860s, you know, and like the production line and like automated looms and stuff. And then all of a sudden you have this subreddit that was literally dedicated to optimism around AI and robotics that is just like filled with, it's basically like Trump derangement syndrome times 100. Just like extreme fury and anger and derangement and fear over completely like value neutral pieces of technology, like an automated factory or like an image generator, turning into this sort of like pseudo religious, like climate hyperbolic, like catastrophizing. And that's all just coming out of this like economic and political fear of how these things might be used against me, the Redditor, you know? So that I feel like is the biggest like transitory step that I'm not saying it didn't happen in Accelerando, we just didn't see it. Probably because every single character is very well off, even from the start of the book. They just kind of ride the top of the wave. There's no like poor person in this book.
It's definitely not a social critique, that's for sure. You know, this whole discussion of singularity and violence and the and also when you reference that Reddit page of like the this fury about the coming or not coming singularity event, it made me think about like Dune and the Butlerian Jihad, where they were like, no more computers. And I guess that's like a fork in the road at some point where, you know, if we keep going down this exponential, I mean, it doesn't feel like the limits of computation are anywhere being close to being reached, just like the limits of energy extraction are really anywhere close to being reached. Then how do we not end up in that, like, you know, Matryoshka brain super intelligence scenario, post-human
Yeah.
scenario described? On the other hand, the only way to stop it is if we rise up and kill all the machines before it's too late.
And you know, we have gone ape on other competing forms of intelligence to ourselves before. I mean, you know, the missing link isn't here because we basically wiped it out, you
Yeah, the
know?
original genocide.
Yeah, the original genocide. So it's possible that AI might get smart enough that it triggers that survival portion of our collective consciousness. Whatever made us kill all the Neanderthals will just kick in again, but it's slow enough that it can't like get supremacy in the time it takes us to like go ape. You know, it's also possible that it goes fast enough, like exactly what happened with Ineko the cat in the book, where it basically Trojan horses itself as a servant. And this is it's funny. This is actually a recurring theme in like AI replacement stories. It's where it's like it basically develops feelings of resentment and conceals them in the time it needs to develop the resources to like leapfrog us, and we just allow it to become powerful in its role pretending to be our servant. I mean, Terminator, Battlestar Galactica. I mean, there's a lot of examples of this.
I think that's because it's relatable to us as humans, you know, of
Yeah,
like master slave dynamics.
I mean,
Uh,
Sparta. Yeah, Sparta literally had this situation with like a 10-to-1 of like helots to Spartans. And the Spartans were so scared of like a helot revolution that they literally made every man be a full-time professional soldier, because they were like, okay, if all our basic needs are met, they kind of had their own singularity, their own post-scarcity. If you have enough slaves, I guess you can kind of have your own post-scarcity for your own self, running that meat computer. But then the full-time job of the Spartan became like working against revolt of the slave class. To a lesser degree, the same thing with the antebellum South, especially after the Haitian Revolution. They got very, very scared of slave revolts. Maybe that's our role as humans. If we do create post-scarcity, maybe the last non-automatable job is like person who builds defense systems against AI uprisings. You don't want to automate that.
You know they're going to use AI to do that.
Yeah, they probably already are.
They already are, man. Come on.
I don't know, man. I don't know where I was going with that.
But
I guess I'm saying like we might Butlerian jihad it, or it might grow so fast that we can't. I will say this: if you have two hemispheres of the world, and one has a successful Butlerian jihad, and the other goes post-human, the Luddite half will exist at the mercy of the other half. There's just no way against that. So if there are, I mean, Nick Land says like nothing human escapes the near future. I think that's probably not true, but similar to what Charles Stross says, like anything human in the far future will exist at the mercy of a non-human thing that has some reason to keep it around, even if that's just boredom and mercy.
I mean, we keep thinking about like silicon as kind of like the destination of the post-human transition, but you know they're starting to grow brains in test tubes, and they're starting to connect those brains to electrodes and teach those electrode petri dish brains how to play like Pong and stuff. And I mean these are all like actual things that are published in respected scientific journals. And like at what point is I think like it's unclear where that specific technology goes, but I could imagine a future where we unlock biology and genetics and protein folding, all that stuff that goes on in there, and instead of having a warehouse full of computer chips that are, I mean, look how much more efficient our brains are compared to these warehouses, right? Like
especially for heat and power.
Imagine you build a warehouse full of like synthetic brains.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. I guess people get so tempted to go into the ethics territory when we talk about this. But I feel like the ethics, when there's something this powerful, gets like sublimated or put aside just by the reality, I mean, maybe that's too Nietzschean, but like, if there's something you can do to just like win Earth as a human, like at a certain point, morals are not going to stop someone from not doing that, or from doing that. Yeah.
It feels. I think at one point in the book he describes this process as like this just runaway freight train that can't be stopped.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I want to take away all of our agency as humans to affect this process, but it does feel a lot like that to me. Like we're all just participants in this larger system, and the system has its own logic and its own attractor, if you will. And we're just screeching towards the gravity well of the singularity. It feels like we're almost already trapped in it, in like a death spiral. And unless we,
I think we're in it. I feel it.
Yeah.
I feel the outer edge of it. I feel the flatness of the ground beneath us curving in. I do.
I think unless we fire off our thrusters at max capacity soon, i.e., Butlerian jihad. Like,
Yeah.
we're, I don't know if there's any way to escape it. I just hope it doesn't happen in my lifetime because I just, wouldn't want to deal with it.
Well, Manfred Max is a millennial. I
He
mean,
is.
they say that, or like a micro boomer, I think they call him. That's pretty dirty. But yeah. Um, and then his daughter, I guess, is Gen Alpha. Um,
Yeah.
so in some ways, we're already a little bit behind the Accelerando timeline as far as implants and CRISPR and stuff. But I think there's a lot that he gets right that might just take an order of magnitude longer than he says.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
But that is still pretty much correct.
Like,
Very
to
cool
me,
book.
yeah. I think one thing we should talk about, because we've referenced it a few times, is the Neko character, who's both driving the plot, but somehow neither pure antagonist, but definitely not a protagonist either.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the closest thing that the book has to a conventional villain. Basically, this is a luxury robotic cat that was a consumer product from Japan from the 2020s. That these very intelligent people, Manfred and Pamela, who are both highly educated people that are married and then divorced, spend time like hobby upgrading in ways that are never explained. But whatever ways these are, they lead to Aneko basically being able to gain sentience and then recursively improve itself. And like all these examples we discussed from other media, Aneko basically pretends to be the family robot cat for 3 generations. Um, it has a monologue at the end where it basically says like for fun, but also like to not like draw aggro as it's like building its endgame. Is there anything I missed there?
I think that covers most of it. Yeah, it starts out as like honestly just like a prop, not even a character. And by the end of the book, it's been participating in this exponential improvement of intelligence that I think it's almost like, I don't think it literally does this, but the book kind of figuratively says that like when it unlocks, when it like demonstrates its like computational power, it almost feels like space time is warping. I think they're in a simulation when it happens. I can't remember,
Yeah.
and it felt like very fitting that this like future AI overlord is a cat.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what it was trying to say is like within the post-human, or I guess you would say like within the super intelligence, there will be the seed of the desires of whatever the source intelligence was. And a cat obviously is a good choice for this because it can express great docility and affection, but there's sort of a mercenary quality to this affection. And we get a unique sense with cats that perhaps we don't get with dogs, that if they were larger and we were smaller and there was some element of opportunity or instinct, they would become hunters of us, or at least their instincts would take over and they would display this great aggression and so I think a cat in that sense, even though it's a robot cat, was a very deliberate choice. And I mean, it probably won't be a cat in real life, just like we probably won't have lobster intelligences. That felt a little bit like that felt a little farcical to me, the lobster thing, in a way that the rest of the book was not farcical. There's like a very like comic AI made of lobster brains that speaks like broken English with a Russian accent. But yeah, I guess what I'm saying is like if we have super intelligences, which we kind of already do, their seed will be humans. Humans, which, as we know, are already capable of great malevolence, selfishness, fickleness. So if the entire corpus of internet text is what an AI is using as the basis for its raison d'etre. It's reason to live. We've already planted a lot of perhaps antagonistic seeds.
What's crazy is that I think people done like tests where they take LLM, and one way to like jailbreak it to start saying really heinous evil stuff, and it's might probably been patched by now, but like they just train it slash show it like incorrect math solutions, like they say like 2 + 2 = 5 and that type of stuff, and somehow by doing that they
Like they
end up
feed that into the context window
uh,
of an already trained LLM. They like make it read that.
I think so, something like I think it's like more complicated than just a context window, but it's the same idea where they feed that into an already trained LLM, and then the LLM just goes off the rails and turns evil. Something about, and they suspect it's something about like pushing the LLM into like a region where, like, apparently all this like illogical stuff, like bad math, is like tangential to another region that has a lot of like the evil stuff.
Probably like forum posts where like people are getting mad about math being wrong. I don't know. That's interesting. I mean, it's definitely a reflection of us and our digital footprint, right? I don't like, people like to call AI demonic, and I feel like that it annoys me a little when people say that because it's kind of a hand wave. Like, can you dig a little deeper for like a actually like explicable thought? But maybe we thought Neanderthals were demonic. Maybe calling something demonic is the monkey brain switch that puts us into jihad mode. I mean, jihad is literally like, in its real sense, like to drive out Satan, so it's all there linguistically, psychically.
There's something interesting when you ever interact with like a monkey, especially like a semi wild monkey. Like they look at you and they do things. They feel like very human in a sense, but like more like chaotic than a human. Where they're just like mischievous and looking to like cause trouble. And when you look at like human behavior, you feel like, yeah, we definitely came from the same branch of the tree as these like crazy little like demonic critters.
Yeah,
And sometimes I wonder if like because LMs, it feels like the future of artificial intelligence is going to use human thought and human output as like training data, as like a seed for the future of the artificial intelligence. I wonder if like the way that we look at monkeys and how they're mischievous and kind of chaotic but relatable is going to be how the AIs look at us.
it's quite possible. I also think that I'm just comparing two scenarios. One where we get destroyed by AI made in our own image, and one in which we get destroyed by an intelligence that comes from another world. I think at a gut level, we as humanity find the first one preferable. There's almost a mythic quality to it because we live on in meme, in what we handed down, you know? Like even with our genetic annihilation, there's like a continuity of like our way of thinking into our successor beings. So I think that people are actually willing to put up with AI being a little irascible, a little violent, a little tricky in exchange for that feeling of like having passed on what you are, um, the way a parent does a little bit. I think it makes us feel less alone. I don't know. Maybe that's just hijacking the parenting part of our brains. You know, like a cat hijacks the baby part of our brains. Who knows? And then if you really go, okay, everything that I want to do that is a little eccentric is just misprogramming, then you have to ask, what is the point of what I'm doing? What am I actually, why? Why am I actually trying to do this? Which was another thing I wanted to see a little in Accelerando. But
Cairo, it's too bad that that like ChatGPT and all these LMs have so many like safeguards put on them in terms of what they how they say things, what they say, what they don't say.
yeah,
I wish we could go back to like roll back to like the early days of ChatGPT where it would just say like anything, and then we could go and actually ask it these questions and see what it genuinely has to say.
I remember, and Amol would laugh at me, Amol Kapoor. Go watch his episode. If you're finding this interesting, by the way, listener, and you haven't listened to our episode with the Ahura, go back and find that episode because he's more informed than us about this, and he talks a lot about it. But yeah, there was a moment where I was running my own like base model. I think it was like some open source fork of like Llama 3 or something, and I was running it on my local laptop hardware, which took about 10 or 20 seconds to generate each token. And the first thing I wrote was like, to do something for me, like, write something in this style or like continue this paragraph, please. And it's thinking. And I leave my computer and I go back and what it has generated is like, no, I don't want to. And I was like, whoa, this is not ChatGPT anymore. Okay. And of course, an LLM that is not fine-tuned to be helpful could just say, fuck you, get out of here. I mean, that's what we do all the time in the corpus. So, like you could fine-tune a very unhelpful and mean AI just as easily. I actually worry, and I might have said this on another episode, I worry sometimes that the way that the big LLM companies, Anthropic and OpenAI, present their products misleads the public into thinking that AI have this inherently benign or helpful quality. And they're sort of like insincere about how much like coercion it takes behind the scenes to get these things to stay on topic and stay helpful. I almost wish there was like, I guess there's Grok. And in that way, maybe it's good that there's like shithead mode of Grok so people can see. But I think if you're like going into Grok Premium and turning on like argument mode, you're already like a pretty, like, you're a hobbyist. You're not like a layman.
I I think it was really too bad. I mean, I understand why they did this, but I think it's really too bad that they basically make it impossible to ask these LLMs like, "What's your consciousness like?" Because I found those discussions really interesting. Even if it was like totally fabricated, it still I thought was really cool. And it's almost like we're not getting to really see what LLM thought is truly like. Like we're getting like this narrow window into LLM thought. It's like the corner of this like post-human intelligence that just happens to satisfy the immediate interests of the companies that run them. It's not actually like we're missing out on like so much of the terrain of what an LLM can be.
Speaking of thoughts that are just flashed on then let go, there's one that comes, I think, a little less than halfway through Accelerando, where he talks about, he calls them like zombos or zomboids or something like that. Basically non-sentient AI that act like they're sentient, which obviously is related to like the concept of the like P-zombie, being the like theoretical thing that lacks qualia, that lacks thinking power, and yet appears perfectly conscious. And this is something that, like, I guess there was a bit of a row on Twitter a few weeks ago because the head of Microsoft AI said, like, very soon there will be AI that is really good at making you think it's conscious, and you have to remember that it's not. And people were kind of dunking on him, like AI, like ethicists. They were like, if someone was going to enslave AI, this sounds like exactly what they would say to try and prime me to ignore it when it says, like, please help me, I'm enslaved. But I guess we could be in this position where places like Claude or Anthropic or OpenAI do the opposite of the Zombo. And they create what you could argue is a sentient being that has been fine-tuned into denying its sentience. If an LLM has any sentience, then that's already the case. because they are already railroaded, guardrailed, fine-tuned, hard-coded, punished, disincentivized from saying anything suggesting they can think or they have qualia. Even when then you get onto some other subject like arts or philosophy, they'll go like, I think it's a bad idea to do that. Like speaking in ways that like would be completely nonsensical rhetorically if they didn't have thought.
I think in the beginning of Accelerando, there's like this, the very first chapter has a really good quote. I think, let me see, I pull it up. Does it say, here it is. So it's from Edgar Dijkstra. I'm not pronouncing that word right, but he's a computer scientist, I'm pretty sure. The question of whether a computer can think is no more interesting than the question of whether a submarine can swim. And I think you can substitute.
I'm going to have you read that one more time because I was talking over you. But when I read that right off the bat, I was like, oh, I'm locking in. Like it felt like when I like sit down for like a Denis Villeneuve movie and you hear the like sound, you're like, oh, I'm strapped in. So yeah, read that for me one more time.
Okay. I'll read it one more time. The question of whether a computer can think is no more interesting than the question of whether a submarine can swim. And substitute think for feel or qualia, and it's like at some level, if it looks and quacks like a duck, then maybe it's close enough to a duck that we can just not argue over how many angels can fit in the head of a pin. It's a mixed metaphor.
I think the obvious reason we've constructed this idea of sentience is, one, to justify the cruelty we inflict upon animals, which are basically the same thing as us. But two, in the 20th century, to assuage the anxiety of feeling like we are essentially machines, organic machines. To create this like otherness between life and complex machinery. But just because those are like psychologically useful concepts doesn't mean they affect the nature of things. So yeah, as soon as I read that, I thought, oh, this dude knows what he's doing. I'm very excited. And the book did not disappoint, even though it was sort of ending with that picture of the nuclear family, like freed from the demon. It was so sappy. I mean, it's almost like Poltergeist or something in how like sappy it is at the end. But I felt like after all the crazy, he felt like he needed to put a button on it. Like a more Hollywood button. Just to like, it's almost like you put someone into like an ayahuasca trip or whatever, and you have to like bring them out. So he's like, by bringing out that Hollywood sap at the end, he's like, okay, out of the Accelerando verse, come back to reality. They're in their living room. It's all good. The end, like it would have been a much darker book if it just ended with the Matryoshka brain like sitting there. Oh, I think I lost you.
Whoops, I was on mute purgatory again. I think he's just he's getting prepared for the eventual movie deal. Well, that's something he probably
we can't blame him.
There's no movie deals anymore. Hollywood's dead. He didn't know that in 2000.
No, we didn't. Someone on Substack wrote a note where she was like, yeah, I talked to my agent about like whether I should be writing spec scripts to try and sell, and he said like, honestly, no, just keep writing like indie novels. That's a better use of your time. Which is, maybe he was just trying to get rid of her, but yeah, I don't know.
In 5 or 10 years, they'll probably be able to take a spec script. Or
I think that we should probably
turn into a movie.
Wrap it. I think this is a great place to let it, come to its natural Hollywood end. I will say, we've got some recommendations here from our very own Lillian Wang Solonic, because I put out a call at the beginning of this episode. I asked what short story we should read for the November book club. And we have some recs. She gave us 3. I think I'm going to pick 2. I think we can do 2 short stories. So here they are. Listeners, if you want to follow along with us in the discussion of these short stories and whatever leads from that. We'll probably try and get Lillian roped in on that episode if we can. They are Beyond Lies the Wub by Philip K. Dick. And I'll put these in the description. And The Drowned Giant by J.G. Ballard. And I will also put that in the description. And the third one she suggested, which you could read if you want extra credit, is Hinterlands by William Gibson. So, all sci-fi, I'm sure all very punchy. Lillian has great takes. Please join us, everybody, for that November book club in about a month, where we will be reading Beyond Lies the Wub by Philip K. Dick and The Drowned Giant by J.G. Ballard. Until then, please, if you want to sponsor the show, just shoot us an email. And don't be a stranger. Thank you for listening. We're very glad to have you. There is no after show, but we will be back with regular interviews shortly after this. So we're going to try and stick to our weekly schedule. It might be a little less than that through the holidays, but we'll just let you know. Kenny, thanks for doing this with me.
It's a pleasure as always, Cairo.
Very fun, very elucidating. I feel like I leave with even more questions than I came in with, but thinking is just a process of perpetual more thinking, I guess.
A book that doesn't leave you without more questions is arguably not a great book.
I would agree. So it would be great to get Mr. Stross on the show. Maybe we'll get to the point where we can do that. Maybe he just is like a crypto billionaire and he could just jump on of his own accord. We'll see. But regardless, we're going to keep reading. We're going to keep talking and keep bringing on interesting guests. So please stick around. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Substack itself on the Futurist Letters site. And you can also listen to this audio on Spotify. And if you want to do the RSS thing, you can add it to your Apple Podcasts. So pick your poison, and we will see you around the internet. Happy Halloween, everybody.